This video tutorial is going to be on some real basics of taking a shape, simple shape, gathering some information about that shape, and transferring that information and drawing the shape to a new place. Which for my money is pretty much what you're always doing when you're drawing. I am starting with a real simple shape because it's not the shape that's so important as much as the process and getting some sort of process under your belt to where you're doing it really kind of without even thinking about it. So here goes. Anytime I have a shape, a two-dimensional shape like this, I can identify 4 specific points that define it, the shape vertically and horizontally. I want to find the point of this shape that's the highest this way. I want to find the point of the shape that's farthest this way, the point that's farthest that way, and the point that's farthest that way. So I like to talk about that as finding the top, the right, the bottom, and the left, which can be sort of a fun little term. Abbreviation, that's what I was looking for. So to start doing that, because drawing is so interesting and there's always things that are sort of vying for your attention, vying to tell you what is up and what is down and what is right and what's left, and we're not even talking about what's forward and backward. That gets even crazier. So what I like to start by doing is doing sort of an initial scan, and I'm just going to take my pencil and I'm going to place it exactly horizontally. Humans at level, you might also call it. Humans are good at being able to sort of just automatically get a sense of what is level. So I'm going to scan down. I'm going to start thinking about what's happening what happens right there at the top. I see something. There's a moment right here that happens, and I'm going to keep coming down here, and I see that it ends up here. And of course, this is probably pretty simple, but the more involved your shapes and your objects get, the more you'll want to just sort of be able to, like I say, do this without even thinking about it, because, yeah. So the other thing I'm going to do is imagine this as sort of a scanning in an up and down, or plumb fashion, as some people call it, and seeing also, learning also a little bit about where the points are in that sort of sense. So I can see, this is a very interesting example, because I can see that the highest point is up here, and you might say that the farthest left point is there as well, but it's a little bit, here I'll try to make it a little bit more clear. The farthest left point for this particular shape is really somewhere right around here. I hope I'm looking at this correctly. Yeah, it's not a lot, but it's definitely not there. So these are the sorts of things that will take a little bit of, sometimes they'll surprise you and they go, whoa, okay, I guess that's where you are. And you'll figure those out in time and get better at it. I'm going to say this spot is about the furthest right, and this one is the furthest lowest on the bottom. I'm just making a little dot there, a little indicator, and also a little horizontal and vertical construction mark, guide marks. And now from here, what I'm going to do is to begin creating what I call a bounding box. And this is just going to help define what is vertical, what's horizontal, what is up and down, what's side to side. That's kind of the same. I'm trying to talk and draw at the same time. When you are creating these boxes, and my pencil's a little spazzy right now, these lines, it can be easier sometimes depending on how close it is to one corner or not. For example, that would be a little bit trickier of a line to imagine first off than this one going up that way. So I'm going to cross these like a tic-tac-toe. Keeping it nice and vague and general and light. And I'll tighten things up as I go along. So once I have that, this bounding box, this notional space, what I'm going to do is make sure I note where the corners are. I'm going to create a diagonal from the lower left to the upper right. Let me clean this up a little. And either diagonal will work. So if you're more comfortable with a diagonal going this way, by all means, become friends with that diagonal. But I'm right-handed. This one is a little bit easier for me to kind of do and think about. So that's, no simple task in itself, depending if it's a big shape and you're drawing way across the paper. One thing I like to do is bite off a little bit at a time. I'll make a line and sort of point towards one corner. I'm drawing this and I'm looking here, sketching that and looking here. And then I'm doing the opposite here. And then when I get to the middle, I'm going to do a little both. I'm sketching this, practicing this angle, pointing it a little bit to this guy up here, as well as that one. And eventually, I'll take the plunge and get a sense for that actual diagonal. The other thing I'm going to do, and I'm going to be using that diagonal to help me draw a bigger version of this shape. The other thing I'm going to do as far as gathering information is I am going to try to bisect these lines, just get a sense of where halfway is. That's going to help me sort of figure out additional things, additional placement of points. One thing you can certainly, you can find the exact middle by creating this crisscross, oh, I'm tempted to say applesauce, but I won't do that, which is a very good skill to have in general, but I'm trying to kind of keep the guide marks down to a minimum, mostly just so we're getting close and quick. And And I know this will not qualify as quick, but the whole idea is to get this process under your fingers, so you just sort of do it like that. So now I'm going to come over here that I have all this information that I've gathered. And I want to draw a bigger version of this. Most often when you're drawing something bigger than it actually is, or smaller than it actually is. If you're drawing a house, that would be drawing it smaller, unless you have a really big piece of paper. Okay, I'm going to stop with that. But I will start out with this sort of bounding box. I know I sort of want it in this kind of area. So I'm going to sketch in this initial vertical and horizontal. And then I'm going to think about this angle right here. Might even use my pencil to help me think about it. And I might try to keep that angle and get a sense of, if I drew that angle over in this new box, where that would go. So I'm going to start sketching this in lightly. And there you have it, a perfect duplication of this angle. Well, okay, I like making that joke. But the whole point is that, one of the points is that it's not going to be perfect. And that we're sneaking up on this whole thing in a way that will help us come at the whole drawing with that much more confidence. So I'm going to call that okay for now. And then I'm going to check my work. I'm going to clean it up a little bit. I'm going to look at that angle again and see how close it is. I can tell this part here, I think, needs to... Part of the issue is learning how to sketch straight lines. This pencil, once again, will be very helpful in just kind of helping to see just how straight that line is that I'm sketching in. So once I get that, I'm going to start eyeballing it even more. I say, yeah, that angle seems pretty good. Then I'm going to start comparing this triangle to this triangle. Something about comparing triangles seems to be something we humans do decently as well. There's all sorts of thoughts and conversations about that, and I'm sure people have done a lot of great thinking and have a lot of explanations. But I'm going to say that is pretty close to that left triangle. And now I'm going to go about committing to these points and completing a bounding box that hopefully will be extremely close to the proportions of the bounding box of the shape I'm trying to draw. You can tell down here I've been a little sloppy, so I'm going to clean it up a little bit. Once you start double checking it, you'll hopefully quickly be able to kind of see, oh, wait a second, I didn't really draw this line through the point. I had it off enough to where it was going to kind of mess with things too much. So let me look at this. I'm going to sort of give it the old eyeball test now. And this is, kidding aside, this is what you need to do. You need to say, does this rectangle look proportionally the same as this rectangle? And to my eye, even this is probably, it's all a little bit distorted because of the angle of video recording, but to my eye, I don't know if you can tell, but this one looks sort of taller. This one looks a little wider, and I think what's going on is a few things. I think up there it started being a little bit too loosey-goosey. I just said loosey-goosey. That could be the first time I've ever said that in a video. And this line is a little bit too unclear. I may have just sort of made it a little too, I don't know. But the point is you're going to eyeball it. But if you started out with this sort of eyeballing and just sort of went for it, you may get really good at that. But especially at the beginning and for a long time, getting this sort of process, just doing something that you do so quickly is to look at a shape, and you'll sort of already imagine what the box might be like. You'll imagine this, and you'll draw this like that. And it won't be a matter of sort of doing all these steps so slowly and painstakingly. But until we get to that point, let's keep practicing here. I could check these midpoints, but once again, I'm trying to kind of just make some judgment calls on how much I want to be fussing and measuring. I'm already doing plenty of fussing and measuring, seems to me. So I'd like to get to some actual drawing. There's always this trade-off between diving in with no plan and finding yourself way into drawing and not really knowing what's going on or how to fix it, versus spending all day getting out your protractor and ruler and lines and anyways, like I said, hopefully this will get to be something that happens so quickly that it won't be cumbersome. So once I have this, then I'm really going to start just noticing and placing these points of my original shape. In my bounding box, I'm gonna use these midpoints. Let me test you. See just how close you are to halfway. That's pretty close. Good enough for demonstration. I'm going to put this about right there. Say that that's that point. And this last point, or the most low, the bottom point, I'm going to imagine as being right there. Let's give it a go. I'm just going to sort of start sketching in this curved line. And by the way, this sort of curvy triangle is one of my favorites for several reasons that if you stick around with me and drawing long enough, you'll learn why. But let's try this one over here. And now I'm going to do this one. So you notice I'm, once again, sketching things in lightly. Seeing how it seems, I feel a little bit like, well, let me see, a couple things going on. I think this curve is a little bit more like that, yeah. And another, I'll get to the other curves, I'll get to you other curves in a moment. The other great thing about this technique is that it also, with this bounding box, it gives us all these negative shapes to help us imagine what our positive shape is and where the lines are. So looking at this shape is going to help me draw this line over here. I feel like it hooks maybe a little bit more down here. I'm trying to not get too wrapped up in getting this exactly. The whole point is getting something kind of quick and close. That needed to be sort of wider, it seemed to me. And this guy, I'm going to do something like that. So once I'm relatively happy with it, and I would, it still seems a little off to me. You may be familiar with the notion of the drawing from the right side of the brain and versus the left side of the brain. That's a fun, long conversation, but I will say that one thing I like to, I feel that makes sense to me about the using the right brain versus the left brain is I've been sort of laying in this, not sort of, I've been completely, totally laying in this shape, thinking of a little bit of the overall shape, but more so the lines and the points and the angles and the space that it takes up and stuff like that. And I feel that's a completely important and valid, critical part to my drawing process, and I know most artists do. But at the point where I can really start looking at this shape, and maybe I'm going to imagine it as like like an arrow. Maybe it's an arrowhead pointing down this way or something. I can, if my right brain will kind of gauge this whole shape and think of it as its own entity instead of a combination of these lines. And doing that and sort of getting a real feel for that is for me the main way that the drawing on the right side of the brain kicks in for me. I'm adjusting a little bit because I'm kind of thinking of this. Does that really look like the same arrow head that's pointing down that way? That last part may make sense to you, it may not. But you can see that I've adjusted to the point where that initial bounding box was really, I wasn't quite sticking to it. If I wanted to, I could keep adjusting and correcting. But once you can do that really quickly, you can really start to transfer these shapes and draw them in a way that, for me, is putting a little extra work in ahead of time. But when you start combining multiple objects is when this technique is really going to come in helpful. So I'm going to leave it there for right now. If you're in my class, I handed out a handout. That's what you do with a handout. You hand them out. With a bunch of simple two-dimensional shapes on it. And this would be the first thing I would do to sort of go about getting a sense of how to draw those shapes. Anyways, practice this and have fun.